All right, guys, today we're gonna talk about catching fish on offshore cover. You know, a lot of people think of fishing deep diving crankbaits in the summer as a brush pile thing or a rock on the bottom kind of a thing. But a crankbait can be a very effective lure for pretty much any offshore cover or offshore structure. If you've got a ditch, a ledge, an edge, you can work a crankbait, and if you can keep it in the strike zone, you can catch a lot of fish. In fact, one of the #1 reasons you fish a crankbait is because it is a lure that will stay in the strike zone longer, create more vibration, and in many cases just be much more effective at fishing deep. Now, there's a couple things you have to keep in mind when it comes to fishing a crankbait, especially a deep diving crankbait. For the most part, you want to be able to cast as far as you can, or after the lure hits the water, you want to back off and do what's called long lining, where you get the bait into the strike zone longer. And let me explain why that is. So for about 1/3 of the retrieve, the lure is on its way down, working its way into the strike zone. For about 1/3 of the retrieve, it's in the strike zone at the depth that it's designed to run at. And then for another 1/3 of the retrieve, it's working its way back up to the angler. So a lure that will run deep, that will allow you to keep it in the strike zone longer, is a lure that's going to be much more effective. But to keep that lure in the strike zone, you have to keep in mind what your cover is, the type, the structure, and all of the variables that lure is going to come in contact with, because that's going to determine the rod that you select. So anytime you fish a crankbait, you're going to want to fish a rod that's got more of a moderate or slow action. But there's going to be times that you want a less moderate action, or a moderate that's a little faster, and maybe even a moderate fast. If you're fishing over shale, ledges, rock, anything hard that lure is going to be running into, you want the rod to be able to deflect. So when that lure hits that rock or that chunk or that log, it can back up, and when it does, the rod responds to that. So that more moderate action loads a little deeper, it bends a little deeper, and it slings that bait out there a little better. I also like as long a rod as you can get away with. In this case, I've got a 7'6", but I'll go as long as 7'11", and really get that long cast, really get that long, deep dive. And then when that fish hits it, you've got more rod to give. And especially when big fish come up from deep, they almost always want to jump. And so when they get ready to jump, if you've got the weight of that crankbait outside the mouth and they shake their head, that rod acts like a shock absorber. If you get into some softer cover, some milfoil or other submerged vegetation, and you're trying to run that bait right along the top of it, that's when you want to move to a less moderate, meaning a moderate fast or a little less moderate action rod, because what that's going to do is when that bait catches that grass, you're still going to have enough power to rip it free, and you're going to be able to get those reaction strikes from when you rip that bait free from the grass. Now, the 1, 2, 3 punch for me is the right rod and as light a line as you can get away with, because line diameter also affects the depth that the bait runs. So if you're going to fish a heavy line, you might need to go to a 12-foot crankbait to get to 10 feet. So most manufacturers rate their baits around 12-pound fluorocarbon, 12-pound monofilament. So if you're fishing heavier than that, you're going to run a little shallower. If you're fishing lighter than that, you're going to run a little deeper. Almost exclusively, I'm going to be in the 6 range with the gear ratio of my my reel when I'm crankbait fishing. One thing I'm a big fan of doing, especially in the summertime, is driving around and looking at my graph and carrying a buoy with me. Because live target and structure scan and all the fancy electronics in the world are great, but once you back way off of a particular target, if you don't have a visual reference of where that piece of cover or structure is, you're gonna have a hard time presenting that lure. Drop that buoy and then throw the lure as far past it as I can, and then either back paddle or turn my motor on real low and just let line out as I back away. Now it's only going down about 1/8 of the retrieve. It's in the strike zone about 6 to 8, and then it's got 1/8 to come back to the top. So you keep the bait in the strike zone longer. But here's what I'll tell you. The only thing that you need to be successful deep crankbaiting is you can take a simple app like the Navionics app and just find contour lines, go out there, drop a jig to the bottom, see how deep it is, take off 2 feet, tie a crankbait that runs that depth, and start casting, and you can generally find fish. So you can make crankbait fishing as simple or as complicated as you want it. But once you realize they're not on the bank and you start to work your way out and find that first cover or that second or third place where they're gonna stage up to be more comfortable, because there's higher water temperature, so it's cooler down there, because again, there's a lot of pleasure boat traffic and things like that, the more often you're gonna find success with the crankbait. So guys, listen, if you have not tried deep cranking on all types of cover when it comes to finding fish in the summer, you're missing out on a big part of where fish live and a big part of where fish heavily feed in the summertime. So add deep cranking to your arsenal, do a map study of the reservoir that you're fishing, figure out where those fish are gonna be before you go to the water, and I promise you, you'll start catching more fish during the summertime when everybody else is thinking about going to the park or skiing or doing something else, because they think that the fish have disappeared. They haven't disappeared, they just relocated. So guys, I hope you liked this video. Do me a favor, subscribe to the Monster Bass channel for more awesome tips like this, and we'll see you guys in the next video.